Hey everybody, we're going to call this Cab Conversations. And really today, what I'd really probably want to talk most about is walking fields. And I've got a lot of phone calls, I'd say in the last week or so, really looking for answers. And a lot of the answers I'm going to give people are, see, not what they want to hear, right? We always want to try to blame something. I'd say someone really, but we're always trying to blame something other than the weather. Though the weather is almost always the last thing that farmers want to hear is the problem or the cause of what they're dealing with. And more often than not, this year, I would say the weather is the cause of most of our problems. And I know it's a difficult answer, or kind of a difficult conversation, or not the thing people want to hear, but more often than not, that's the problem. We're dealing more with weather or environmental factors and stands than we are with anything else. I've got, I would say, a few guys that talk about planting depth. I've got guys that think fertilizer's the issue. I've got guys that think, you name it, a gamut of what could potentially be the problem. The herbicide didn't work because it's not that good of a herbicide, or it's kind of anything and everything but the weather. And when I'm looking at a lot of our herbicide stuff, you got to remember, especially even with the planting, we added, I would say, almost a historic weather event, May 8th, 9th, somewhere in there, where we were cold, wet, and we got down into the mid 20s at night. And it's not ideal. We don't typically see that in a planting season, and we don't really ever normally deal with that during planting time. I think Chicago's National Weather Service put out a thing saying that was the coldest temperature we'd seen that late in the season since 1960 something. So in 60 years, it's the coldest it's ever been this late in the year. And to me, that is a cause of a lot of the problems we had. And another part of it is, so I am in the southern part of my area today where they had more rain in May. But in our northern part of my territory, we had less rain in May and things were really dry. We did a lot of tillage when it was really dry. We planted a lot of crops when it was dry, and then we got that cold weather right after. So we had a lot of herbicide that got sprayed on weeds right before it got really cold. And we were doing tillage. So we kind of moved some weeds around, and then we hit them with tillage, and then we sprayed them after we planted. And then they were already hurt from tillage. They were hurt from the cold weather. And then then they started regrowing once the weather warmed up and the soil was moist. So we're dealing with weeds that were shut down when we sprayed herbicide on them. And you move to the southern part of my territory here, and we had a lot of corn that got planted early, and even early for us, middle April, end of April. And then on top of that, we got that cold weather. I mean, corn took on average probably about 3 weeks to almost a month to come up. And it sat there in that stuff for a long time. And yeah, we're getting some issues. And when I look at a lot of fields, I was just looking at a field with a lot of sand in it. So sand doesn't have a lot of insulating properties. It's pretty coarse. And they thought maybe the planting depth was too deep. But when I looked at it, it was actually pretty shallow, more on the shallower end of where I'd want to be planting if we're planting the first week of May or so. And you get extreme cold like that, it's going to make corn leaf out. I've had a lot of people, not the seed that I work with, but pretty much you name the seed. So maybe we had some low vigor on seed that was produced last year. And I don't think I've seen that anywhere either. It's just been leafing out underground. It's not even germinated, or it germinated and then it shot a sprout and then it got that cold weather and that was it. It's just a combination of a lot of environmental factors that's leading to a lot of the problems we have. And we're trying to, find someone or something to blame other than the weather. And I had a lot of experiences with this in my career. I remember looking back at a letter I got from a customer, just back when customers wrote handwritten complaints. But I got a letter one year from a customer, and same thing. We had kind of extreme weather events, and we missed weed control. We had to go back in, spray it again, cleaned it up, and the customer wrote a letter saying he didn't want to pay for the second pass of herbicide because we got to blame everything on the weather. And it definitely was weather. I mean, I looked at it, chemical rep looked at it, we had multiple people look at this farm, same thing. It all came up. It was cool. I think it was the similar year to this year, not quite as extreme cold, but we had some issues that the herbicide didn't work, and we had to go in with conventional corn herbicide because it was a conventional cornfield, and it wasn't cheap to clean up. But yeah, same thing. We had somebody who wanted to blame somebody, not something that relates to the weather. And I know it's really hard. It's a tough pill to swallow. I guess as an agronomist and somebody who looks at this at a scientific basis, sometimes it's very hard for me to understand the need to want to get somebody, to fix it or do something about it. Sometimes it's just, you get kind of a crappy card dealt to you, and that's just the way it is. I know it's a tough pill to swallow. It's very hard as an agronomist to walk fields and tell guys, well, you did everything right. Mother Nature just threw you a curveball. And, it stinks. It's tough to deal with. It seems like that's the hardest thing to explain to guys, that weather could be the problem. I've got guys that want to blame the herbicide. You want to blame, you name it, the tillage, everything. And, it's always, sometimes the simple answer is the weather was just bad. I don't know. It's really hard to do that for some reason. And I don't know what else to say about it. It's kind of hard to figure out, but I guess the easiest thing for me to say is sometimes Mother Nature does throw you a curveball. And I know it's hard to fathom, and it seems to be hard to understand, but from a scientific basis, sometimes that's the easiest explanation. And I've been on complaints where we've walked fields and it was the herbicide or it was something else, or, maybe even this year, I think some of our poor emergence could be contributed to herbicide injury, just because of how long corn sat in the ground and we had a lot of water pushing herbicide into a seed zone. It's entirely possible, but I don't think that's the whole thing. And, there's insects, there's a lot of stuff that anytime corn sits in the ground for more than 10 to 14 days, we just inevitably end up with more issues. And that's just kind of the way it is. I walked some really good stands, and I think I put out a podcast talking about, I maybe have worded this incorrectly. I said I think the biggest waste of time for farmers is only focusing on the poor fields. And I don't know if I would say it's a waste of time, but it's definitely something that you will lose the most money on. Focusing too much of your attention on the poorest fields and trying to fix them, you're forgetting about your good fields, that you have plenty of management considerations to make that could still make them better. And I think we get focused on the bad, and we kind of forget about the good. And I've taken a break today a little bit from looking at the bad stuff. I went and looked at a bad field, and now we looked at a good field. And we're going to go look at some more good fields. And we're going to remind the grower that there is good out here. There is more than one field out of 50 that looks pretty good. They all look pretty decent. There might be a few that we have to make some management considerations on, but I did make a Twitter post, and we talked about sometimes the hardest things to tell guys to park the planter or say that there's nothing more they can do to improve. Let's manage it for what it is. And when we're in financial times like we are now, I think the easiest way to lose money is to overmanage fields and try to spend more money to fix things. The best thing to do is to manage it for what it is. If we have a 20,000 plant stand and we're only going to expect 160, 180 bushel corn, we got to manage it as 160, 80 bushel corn. You don't want to manage it as 250 bushel corn. So, we want to make sure that we're not trying to apply more nitrogen to get it to do more. If its max yield is 200 bushels, we really don't want to manage it for much more than that. You could put more nitrogen on, but are you going to get the benefit from it? Your return is going to be much lower on these lower populations or rougher fields or fields that have major compaction issues or fields that are under severe drought stress, which we saw last year. I think a lot of that is it always feels like we need to do something. We have this constant urge to try to fix it. We can't give up. And it's kind of a farmer spirit. And I know that that's tough to swallow. It's kind of a tough pill to swallow. But at the same time, I think at some point we have to make business decisions and management decisions that are tough. I mean, that's kind of part of running your own business. It's hard to know when to cut your losses and move on, but sometimes you have to do that. And I think we need to make those considerations. It's not $4 corn where if we throw more nitrogen at it, if we don't get, if we break even on it, we're doing all right. At $3 corn, it takes a lot more corn to break even. And it's just something we got to be getting into the mindset of, is we need to start managing for what it is. And there are good fields that we can increase yield on and we can improve. Or, we always talk about the best potential for corn is when it's in the back. So we're trying to protect yield in these better fields. And in the worst fields, we've cut our losses. Let's manage it for what it is and not overmanage these poorer fields to try to bring them up. It's really, really hard to improve something that's very, very, let's say, questionable. So anyway, that's it. It's a cab conversation while I'm sitting in the cab, trying to rest up a little bit, I guess, take a respite from walking fields. And it's 85 degrees out and humid as heck today. But hopefully this kind of brings some clarity and I guess more of a different mindset to growers. We're all about increasing yields, but at the same time, it's time to call a spade and realize that some of these poorer fields, there's not much more we can do. We could throw a lot of stuff at them, but let's manage these good fields and spend more time on where we're going to make more money and take some of these poorer fields and manage them correctly and don't throw a bunch of good money after bad. So I'll catch you guys next time.